Have you ever thought about how science and faith can walk hand in hand in perfect harmony? The story of Saint Giuseppe Moscatti shows us that not only is it possible, but it can also become a path to holiness. This 20th century Neapolitan physician turned his profession into a true apostolate, seeing in each patient the suffering face of Christ. Through his extraordinary life, we will discover how a man of science found in medicine a way to live the gospel, becoming the holy doctor who continues to inspire believers and healthcare professionals around the world. Chapter 1. The first steps of the saintly doctor, Giuseppe Moscatti, was born on July 25, 1880, in Benevento, Italy, into a deeply Catholic family. His parents, Francesco Moscatti and Rosa de Luca, instilled in him and his 8 siblings a strong faith and a meticulous education. Little Giuseppe stood out for his precocious intelligence and natural kindness, qualities that his parents recognized as divine gifts to be carefully nurtured. The Moscatti family moved to Naples when Giuseppe was still very young. This city, with its contrasts between aristocratic wealth and the extreme poverty of its slums, left a deep mark on the future saint's heart. From his window, young Giuseppe would watch the processions that paraded through the streets in honor of the Virgin Mary and the saints, absorbing the popular Neapolitan religiosity that he would later integrate into his own spirituality. One event definitively shaped his medical vocation. At the age of 12, Giuseppe witnessed how his brother Alberto, who had suffered a serious accident during his military service, received medical care at home. The dedication of the doctors who treated his brother, along with the daily suffering he observed, awakened in him a deep compassion and the desire to alleviate others' pain. At that moment, Giuseppe felt God calling him to the noble art of medicine. During his adolescence, Giuseppe combined his studies with long hours of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. This practice, which he maintained throughout his life, instilled in him a contemplative spirit that would later permeate all his professional activities. His classmates already noticed in him an uncommon spiritual maturity, evident in his kind manner with everyone and his particular concern for the most vulnerable. Observing his qualities, his parents encouraged him to pursue a medical career, seeing in it not merely a worthy profession, but a path of Christian service. This providential vision of medicine as a form of apostolate would accompany Giuseppe throughout his life, forming the bedrock of his future sanctity. At barely 17 years old, Giuseppe enrolled in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Naples, thus beginning a journey that would lead him to the heights of science and holiness. Chapter 2. The dedicated student. The corridors of the University of Naples became the stage where Giuseppe Moscatti began to forge his extraordinary destiny. As a medical student, he stood out not only for his brilliant intelligence, but also for a dedication to study that many professors deemed exceptional. While his classmates limited themselves to memorizing what was necessary to pass, Giuseppe delved deeply into each subject with genuine scientific passion, convinced that every piece of knowledge acquired could one day save a life. His long hours of study did not prevent him from fulfilling his religious obligations. Every morning, before heading to the university, he attended Holy Mass and received Holy Communion, which he considered the source of strength to face his demanding studies. His classmates were surprised to see him pray briefly before each exam, not out of fear of failure, but to offer all his efforts to God. This spiritual discipline enabled him to maintain an admirable serenity even in the most challenging moments of his academic training. During these university years, Giuseppe began to visit the Hospital of the Incurables, one of the oldest in Naples. There, in addition to his clinical practice, he spent extra time visiting the most abandoned patients, bringing them not only human comfort, but also the message of Christ. Veteran doctors watched with admiration as this young student treated each patient with an uncommon delicacy and respect. seeing in them not mere clinical cases, but persons created in the image and likeness of God. His thesis advisor, the renowned Professor Antonio Cardarelli, recognized Giuseppe's exceptional talent for scientific research. Under his guidance, Moscatti conducted innovative studies on liver physiology that surprised the medical community for their rigor and originality. However, what most impressed his mentor was the humility with which Giuseppe accepted praise, always attributing his achievements to divine grace rather than to his own merits. On August 4, 1903, Giuseppe Moscatti graduated with top honors, presenting a brilliant thesis on hepatic urea. That day, while his classmates enthusiastically celebrated the end of their studies, Giuseppe withdrew to the university chapel to thank God for the gift of medical science he had just received. There, before the Blessed Sacrament, he renewed his commitment to practice medicine as a form of Christian apostolate, promising to see in each patient the suffering face of Christ. This solemn promise would mark his entire professional career. Chapter 3. The Doctor of the Poor. The Hospital degli Incurabili in Naples became the main field of apostolate for the young Dr. Giuseppe Moscatti. From his very first day of medical service, he established a routine he would maintain throughout his career. He began his day by attending Holy Mass at dawn, offering his work for the sick he would treat. This spiritual practice was not a mere ritual, but the wellspring that nourished his extraordinary professional dedication. The hospital wards soon came to know the tireless efforts of Dr. Moscatti. While other doctors spent only a few minutes with each patient, he would linger at every bedside, not just to examine physical symptoms, but also to attentively hear the patient's concerns. His diagnoses, always accurate, amazed people for their precision, the fruit of both his extensive scientific knowledge and the meticulous attention he devoted to each person. One nurse commented, "Dr. Moscatti doesn't just look at the body, he seems to read the patient's soul." Giuseppe's love for the poorest became legendary in Naples. In his private practice, he established fees according to each patient's financial situation. For the wealthier, he charged the usual fees for a prestigious doctor. For the middle class, he significantly reduced his rates. And for the indigent, he not only offered his services free of charge, but often gave them money for medicine, disguising this charity as part of the treatment. One day, a nurse caught him placing coins under the pillow of a poor patient and asked why he was doing it. He answered simply, "This medicine doesn't appear in pharmacology textbooks, but it cures better than many others." The epidemics that periodically ravaged the poorest neighborhoods of Naples revealed the heroic nature of his dedication. During the cholera outbreak of 1911, while many doctors fled out of fear of contagion, Giuseppe settled in the Cannocchia Hospital, dedicated exclusively to cholera patients. There, risking his own life, he attended the sick day and night, offering them both medical relief and spiritual solace. Priests who administered the last sacraments were edified by the way Dr. Moscatti spiritually prepared the dying to receive the anointing of the sick, explaining to them the redemptive value of suffering united to Christ's passion. His fame as an exceptional physician quickly spread beyond the hospital walls. Nobles and commoners, rich and poor, all sought to be treated by that doctor whose diagnostic skill seemed almost supernatural. Nevertheless, Giuseppe never showed favoritism toward influential patients. Instead, he upheld his preferential option for the most needy. One Neapolitan princess, outraged at having had to wait while he attended a beggar, reproached him for this apparent lack of deference. Giuseppe answered with evangelical gentleness, "Madam, this man might not have survived if he waited, whereas you, thank God, have better health and the resources to seek out other doctors." Chapter 4. Science in the Service of Faith. The laboratory of the Hospital degli Incurabili was the scientific sanctuary where Giuseppe Moscatti conducted his brilliant research. A pioneer in the field of clinical biochemistry, his studies on diabetes, tuberculosis, and liver diseases contributed significantly to medical advances of his time. His colleagues watched admiringly as he combined strict scientific methodology with a diagnostic intuition that seemed to go beyond the limits of conventional science. For Giuseppe, there was no conflict between science and faith. In an era when scientific positivism declared the incompatibility between rational knowledge and religious belief, Moscatti's life demonstrated that both dimensions could be harmoniously integrated. "Science without faith is like a ship without a compass," he often told his students. This conviction was not a mere slogan, but the guiding principle of all his professional activity. He interpreted every scientific discovery and each advancement in his research as a closer approach to the Creator's wisdom. His office in the hospital reflected this synthesis of science and faith. Alongside modern medical instruments and the most up-to-date scientific texts, a crucifix hung on the wall, where Giuseppe would pause briefly before every major decision. His more skeptical colleagues, initially critical of this practice, ended up respecting that devotion which, far from hindering his clinical judgment, seemed to sharpen it. An atheist colleague once confessed, "I don't share his beliefs, but I must admit that Moscatti diagnoses better after his moments of prayer." Indeed, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in April 1906 tested both his medical expertise and his Christian courage. While lava threatened the hospital of Torre del Greco, Giuseppe personally organized the evacuation of the patients, carrying the most disabled in his own arms. Once everyone was safe, he was seen kneeling before a statue of the Virgin that stood in one of the wards, giving thanks for divine protection. This episode, witnessed by many, enhanced his reputation not only as a skilled doctor, but also as a man of God. In his lectures at the University of Naples, where he became a professor of physiological chemistry, Giuseppe integrated his vast scientific knowledge with the Christian view of the human being. Without ever imposing his beliefs, he illuminated anatomical and physiological explanations with reflections on the dignity of the person as an image of God. His students learned not only how to diagnose illnesses, but also how to see the patient as a brother, deserving of respect and compassion. "Medicine that concerns only the body," he would say, "is incomplete. The true physician must treat the whole person, body, mind, and spirit." Before continuing, we'd like to know, which saint of the Church has most inspired your life or career? Saint Giuseppe Moscatti transformed medicine into an apostolate, seeing Christ in every patient. Share your experience and tell us who your reference saint is and why you identify with his or her story. Chapter 5. The Exemplary Professor. The lecture halls at the University of Naples filled to overflowing when Professor Moscatti gave his lessons. Students from all grades, even from other faculties, came to listen to this physician whose wisdom transcended conventional science. Giuseppe turned each class into a holistic experience in which technical knowledge was interwoven with lessons on medical ethics and profound humanity. "It's not enough to be competent doctors," he repeated to his students. "You must also be compassionate doctors." His teaching methodology broke with the traditional distance between professor and student. While other faculty members maintained a formal, authoritarian stance, Giuseppe engaged in close dialogue with each student, adapting to their abilities and needs. To him, education was not about filling minds with information, but about igniting in every young person a passion for truth and service. This pedagogy, inspired by his Christian vision of the person, shaped his students not only into competent physicians, but also into professionals with a deep sense of vocation. The clinical cases he presented in his classes were not just medical records, but human stories, narrated with respect and sensitivity. Giuseppe taught his students to look beyond the symptoms, to discover the person who suffers behind every illness. On one occasion, he gently reprimanded a student who referred to a patient as the cirrhosis case in bed 12. "Never forget," he told him with paternal firmness, "that we don't treat diseases but the sick." That man has a name, a history, and dignity. Before being a clinical case, he is a child of God. Hospital practicums under his supervision became true lessons in Christian humanity. Giuseppe led his students through the wards, teaching them both to perform accurate diagnoses and to offer a word of encouragement to the patient. He insisted on small gestures that many considered superfluous, calling patients by their names, explaining their condition in understandable terms, listening to their worries. Medicine, he explained, is not learned solely from books, but also at the bedside, and not just with your mind, but with your heart. His influence as a professor went beyond academia. Many students, initially drawn by his brilliant scientific reputation, discovered through his example a model of Christian life. Without overt proselytism, Giuseppe conveyed his faith through the coherence of his daily actions. One former student would recall years later, "In Professor Moscatti, I encountered for the first time a man for whom faith was not just a theory, but a reality that permeated every aspect of his existence. Seeing him kneel in the university chapel before his lectures impressed me more than his brilliant scientific explanations. He taught me not only medicine, but a way of living." Utique, Chapter 6. Miracles in the Hospital. The corridors of the Hospital degli Incurabili witnessed extraordinary events that science could not fully explain. Although Giuseppe Moscatti, with his habitual humility, never claimed to have any healing power, both patients and colleagues began to observe that his diagnoses were exceptionally precise and that his treatments achieved recoveries even when other doctors had lost all hope. A particularly striking case occurred with a young woman named Maria Grazia Alfiero, who suffered from severe tuberculosis deemed terminal by various specialists. When she was brought to Dr. Moscatti, he examined her with his usual thoroughness and, after a brief moment of reflection, told her with serene conviction, "Have faith, my child, you will not die of this illness." He prescribed a treatment that other physicians considered useless, yet he insisted that it be followed to the letter. Against all medical odds, the young woman gradually improved until she was completely cured. Years later, Maria Grazia testified during the beatification process that while Moscatti was examining her, she saw him surrounded by an inexplicable light. He seemed to have a gift for detecting hidden diseases, astonishing his colleagues. On one occasion, while making rounds with a group of students, he suddenly stopped at the bed of a patient who had been admitted for a simple fever. After a brief examination, he diagnosed a cerebral aneurysm that no test had detected. He immediately ordered a surgical intervention that saved the patient's life. When asked how he had arrived at that diagnosis without clinical evidence, Giuseppe simply replied, "The Virgin Mary guides my hands and eyes when I examine my patients." His ability to foresee the course of illnesses was equally remarkable. He would often inform families of the outcomes of serious cases with a certainty that was later confirmed by events. One mother recalled how Moscatti assured her that her son, who was in a coma after an accident, would awaken exactly at 3 o'clock the following afternoon, the hour of Christ's death on the cross. "Pray with faith," he told her, "and at that hour your son will return to life." The young man indeed regained consciousness at the very moment he had predicted, prompting the conversion of several skeptical doctors who had witnessed it. Despite these extraordinary occurrences, Giuseppe always maintained a deeply Christian humility. Whenever a grateful patient credited him for a cure, he invariably responded, "It is not I who heal, but God through medicine. I am only His instrument." This conviction led him to combine the most advanced medical treatments with the recommendation of prayer and the sacraments, especially confession and the Eucharist, which he considered medicines for the soul that also benefit the body. Even in cases of terminally ill patients, where medical science was powerless, Giuseppe viewed them as opportunities to practice what he called the medicine of consolation. With extraordinary delicacy, He helped dying patients accept their passing as an encounter with Christ, easing their physical pain while preparing their souls for the transition to eternity. One nurse testified to having seen how a dying patient, after Dr. Moscatti's visit, died with an expression of peace and serenity that was incomprehensible given his previous state of agitation and anxiety. Chapter 7. The Eucharist at the Center. Dawn in Naples always found Giuseppe Moscatti on his knees before the Blessed Sacrament. Before beginning his day at the hospital, he unfailingly attended Holy Mass at the nearest church, where he received the Holy Eucharist with a devotion that impressed everyone present. This daily encounter with Christ was not merely a pious habit, but the vital source that fueled all his medical and teaching activities. "Without the Eucharist," he once confided to a priest friend, "I would not have the strength to face the human suffering I see every day in the hospital." The chapel of the Hospital degli Incurabili served as his refuge during his grueling workdays. In short breaks between consultations, Giuseppe would retire there for a few minutes of silent adoration. The nurses knew that if there was an emergency, they should first look for him in the chapel. One colleague recalled finding him absorbed in prayer, so concentrated that he seemed oblivious to the hospital's bustle. Upon noticing his presence, Giuseppe apologized, saying, "I come to consult the divine physician about the hardest cases." His participation in Holy Mass reflected his deep theological understanding of the Eucharistic mystery. Giuseppe experienced each celebration as a true representation of Christ's sacrifice, uniting himself consciously and fervently with the offering on the altar. To him, receiving the body of Christ was anything but a routine act. It was a transformative encounter that he then strove to manifest in his dealings with the sick. A student once asked him about the secret of his tireless dedication, and he replied, "Each morning, Christ enters my heart in communion. The rest of the day, I try to bring him to those who suffer." Giuseppe's Eucharistic devotion extended beyond the walls of the church. His private consultation room, decorated with sober elegance and dominated by a crucifix and an image of the Virgin, seemed like an extension of the hospital chapel. Many patients remarked that Dr. Moscatti treated them with the same reverence a priest shows when handling sacred vessels. This attitude was no coincidence. Giuseppe saw in each patient, especially the poorest and the abandoned, the suffering Christ who continued his passion in the ailing members of his mystical body. The Corpus Christi processions in Naples always included the distinguished presence of this renowned doctor. While other professionals of his status preferred to remain aloof from such popular expressions of faith, Giuseppe took part with humble fervor, joining the ordinary people who accompanied the Blessed Sacrament through the streets. A young colleague, surprised to see him among the crowd, commented that such practices might seem antiquated to a modern scientific mind. Giuseppe answered calmly, "My friend, any science that fails to recognize Christ present in the Eucharist is more antiquated than any tradition, for it ignores the most important truth ever revealed to mankind." Chapter 8. The Doctor. During wartime. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 profoundly affected Giuseppe Moscatti's life. Although as a civilian doctor he could have avoided involvement in the conflict, he voluntarily asked to care for wounded soldiers arriving in Naples from the front. The military hospital of the Trinity thus became a new mission field, in which his extraordinary medical skill and Christian charity shone with particular intensity. Wards filled with young men who were maimed or dying tested his professional expertise daily, as well as his faith. Giuseppe faced these heartbreaking scenes with a serenity that amazed everyone. "How can he remain so peaceful amid so much suffering?" a nurse once asked. "Because I know this isn't the end," he replied, "and because I try to see in each of these young men's wounds one of Christ's wounds." This supernatural perspective allowed him to work tirelessly, carrying out extremely difficult operations during unending shifts, without ever losing the gentle expression that characterized him. For many of those soldiers, meeting Dr. Moscatti meant not only physical recovery, but also a spiritual awakening. Giuseppe took advantage of their convalescence to engage in deep conversations about the meaning of suffering and life. Without imposing anything, simply by demonstrating a coherent faith, he brought about numerous conversions among those young men who had lost all hope in the horrors of the trenches. A military chaplain remarked, "Dr. Moscatti prepares their souls for my ministry. When I come to administer the sacraments, I find the ground already tilled by his words and example." No! The scarcity of medications during the war spurred his medical ingenuity and his trust in providence. When conventional drugs were lacking, Giuseppe resorted to alternative treatments based on medicinal plants and natural methods he had studied in ancient medical texts. The surprising results of these traditional therapies, combined with his modern knowledge, amazed his colleagues. "God has placed remedies in nature for every illness," he explained, "and a good doctor must be humble enough to recognize and gratefully employ them." Although he wasn't on the battlefield, Giuseppe witnessed the horrors of war firsthand. During an air raid that struck areas near the hospital, he remained alongside the most critically ill patients who could not be transferred to shelters. While bombs fell and the building shook, witnesses saw him move from ward to ward, rosary in hand, praying aloud to encourage the terrified patients. After the bombing, when asked if he had been afraid, he answered simply, "He who is with God does not fear death or anything in this world." The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which compounded the ravages of war, increased his workload exponentially. While many doctors succumbed to exhaustion or fell ill themselves, Giuseppe seemed to multiply his efforts, caring for both wounded soldiers and civilian patients. Those who knew him were astonished by his ability to endure such grueling hours. The secret, which he did not hide, lay in his deep Eucharistic life. Each morning, before starting his hospital rounds, he received communion, drawing from it the strength to face the ordeal. "Christ gives himself to me in the Eucharist," he explained to an exhausted colleague, "so how could I not give myself to these suffering brothers?" Chapter 9. Heroic Virtues. Giuseppe Moscatti's everyday life offered those who knew him a perfect model of Christian virtues practiced with heroic perseverance. His faith, far from manifesting itself only in outward devotions, imbued his every decision, gesture, and word. For him, believing was not merely assenting to abstract truths, but conforming his entire existence to the model of Christ. This living faith was particularly evident in his unwavering trust in divine providence. God never abandons those who trust in him, he would tell his most discouraged patients, and his own life was a convincing testimony to this certainty. Christian hope shone especially brightly in Giuseppe, especially during the most difficult moments. In seemingly hopeless medical cases, when other doctors resigned themselves to the apparent inevitability of death, he maintained a serene confidence that was often rewarded with unexpected recoveries. His hope was not a naive optimism, but rather a deep theological conviction in Christ's definitive victory over evil and death. One colleague recalled asking him how he could remain hopeful in the face of so many therapeutic failures. Giuseppe replied, "No effort to alleviate human suffering is a failure in God's eyes, even when we cannot prevent death. Moreover, for the Christian, death is not the end, but the beginning of true life." Charity was, without a doubt, the virtue that shone most brightly in the saintly doctor's personality. His love for God manifested concretely in his love for neighbor, especially for the poorest and most abandoned. Giuseppe drew no distinction between wealthy and destitute patients. If anything, he showed a particular preference for the latter, whom he treated with exquisite courtesy to make up for the humiliations life had dealt them. He not only treated them free of charge, but often paid for their medications and even provided financial assistance for basic needs. Charity, he would say, must be comprehensive, addressing both the sick body and the circumstances surrounding the patient's suffering. Giuseppe's humility was remarkable in someone of his professional stature. As a professor, internationally recognized researcher, and doctor sought out by Neapolitan high society, he never displayed vanity or self-importance. He attributed his medical successes to God's grace and his failures to his own limitations. In clinical discussions, he listened attentively, even to the youngest students, always willing to learn from others. One anecdote perfectly illustrates this virtue. After making an incorrect diagnosis, he publicly acknowledged his mistake to the entire medical team and thanked the young intern who had arrived at the correct one. "The truly wise person," he later commented, "is the one who acknowledges his wisdom is limited and always open to improvement." Giuseppe's chastity edified all who knew him. In a city like Naples, where temptations abounded, and in a profession that required close physical contact with patients of both sexes, he always maintained an impeccable conduct. This virtue did not stem from any emotional coldness, but from a heart ablaze with love that had found in God and in serving the sick the proper channel for his capacity to love. His was a joyful chastity, free from puritanical rigidity, enabling him to interact with everyone, men and women, with natural friendliness and respect. When a young doctor asked why he never married, he replied, "The Lord has granted me another form of fatherhood, broader and more demanding. Every patient is like a child whom God entrusts to me for a time." Prudence guided his professional and personal decisions. Giuseppe never rushed his diagnoses or his judgments of others. He meticulously studied each clinical case, consulted other colleagues when necessary, and kept himself up to date on the latest medical advances. This virtue was especially evident in his care for the dying. He knew how to choose the right moment to suggest the reception of the sacraments, preparing the way gently, without needlessly alarming the patient, yet ensuring he was not unprepared for that critical passage. A priest once said, admiringly, "Dr. Moscatti has a special gift for recognizing the precise moment when I should step in to administer the last sacraments. Never too soon, never too late." Giuseppe's fortitude showed in his ability to face extreme situations without losing composure. During the eruption of Vesuvius, the epidemics, and the wartime bombings, he always remained at his post, bringing calm to patients and co-workers by his mere presence. This strength of spirit was rooted in his profound life of prayer, and especially in his daily reception of the Eucharist, which he described as the bread of the strong. A nurse recalled seeing him work 36 hours straight, attending to victims of a building collapse without any apparent sign of fatigue. When everything was finally under control, Giuseppe withdrew to the chapel, where, after a brief prayer of thanksgiving, he fell asleep on his knees from sheer exhaustion. Chapter 10. His Passing to Heaven. The morning of April 12, 1927, began for Giuseppe Moscatti like any other day. He rose early, went to Holy Mass at the Gesù Nuovo church nearby, and received Holy Communion with his usual fervor. Then, he returned home to see several patients who were already waiting in his private practice. Nothing in his demeanor or actions suggested that this would be his last day on earth, though some witnesses later recalled a special radiance in his gaze and an unusual insistence on the brevity of life and the importance of being ever prepared for the encounter with God. The day proceeded with the characteristic intensity of his life. After his private consultations, Giuseppe went to the hospital degli Incurabili for his usual rounds. According to one nurse's later testimony, he spent more time than usual at the bedside of a dying patient, offering consolation with words that seemed to prepare not only the patient for his own passing, but also Giuseppe himself for what he would experience just hours later. Suffering, accepted with love, opens the gates of heaven. Soon we shall rest in God's arms, where there is no pain or sorrow. That patient, contrary to all medical expectations, survived, attributing his recovery to Dr. Moscatti's intercession. In the afternoon, Giuseppe returned home, where he still had a few last-minute patients to attend. The final one, a young laborer who could not afford to pay and whom he treated free of charge, later remembered the doctor's extraordinary serenity while examining him. He spoke to me about divine providence, which never abandons its children, and as we said goodbye, he shook my hand with such warmth that I felt as if he were blessing me. Shortly after this patient left, around 3 in the afternoon, Giuseppe went to his room to rest before resuming his activities. It was his sister Anna who found him, seated in an armchair, his head slightly bowed as if in contemplation. A rosary lay between his fingers, and his peaceful expression revealed that death had come to him in prayer. An autopsy would later determine that he had suffered a massive heart attack, leaving no time for pain or fear. He was only 46 years old, at the height of his medical career and apostolic work, a circumstance that magnified the shock at his sudden passing. News of his death quickly spread through Naples, causing widespread mourning. People from all social classes immediately flocked to his home. Fellow doctors, students, patients, but above all, the humble poor, who had been the primary recipients of his charity. Many wept inconsolably, as if they had lost a father or brother. An elderly woman, on hearing the news, cried out, "The holy doctor is dead. Who will take care of us now?" That sense of collective bereavement showed just how much Giuseppe had been a providential figure for Naples' neediest. His funeral, held at the Gesù Nuovo church 2 days later, was an overwhelming display of popular grief. Civil and religious authorities, led by the Cardinal Archbishop of Naples, were taken aback by the thousands who gathered to bid a final farewell to the man many already considered a saint. During the ceremony, several witnesses claimed to have detected a gentle floral scent emanating from the coffin, a phenomenon traditionally associated with sanctity in Christian tradition. Giuseppe Moscatti's body was buried in the Poggio Reale cemetery, but years later, due to his growing reputation for holiness and the miracles attributed to his intercession, it was moved to the Gesù Nuovo church, where it now rests. Chapter 11. Canonization and Legacy. Giuseppe Moscatti's death did not mark the end of his influence, but rather the beginning of a new form of presence among those who had known and admired him. Reports of favors and extraordinary healings attributed to his intercession quickly began to circulate. People from across Italy and even abroad visited his tomb to ask for his help in health crises and other needs. Popular devotion preceded, as is often the case with true saints, the Church's official recognition. His evident reputation for holiness led the Cardinal Archbishop of Naples in 1931, just 4 years after his death, to open the diocesan beatification process. Numerous witnesses testified to the heroic virtues of the Neapolitan doctor. Among them were medical colleagues, nurses, patients, students, and people from all walks of life who had encountered him. All agreed on one fundamental point. Giuseppe Moscatti had lived the gospel in a radical way, transforming his medical profession into a true apostolate in service to Christ present in the sick. A critical component of the beatification process was a rigorous examination of his personal writings. His spiritual journals, letters, and medical notes revealed a rich interior life centered on the Eucharist and charity toward his neighbor. Especially moving were his reflections on human suffering and its redemptive value when united to Christ's passion. The theologians charged with analyzing his writings highlighted the soundness of his spiritual doctrine, fully consistent with church teaching, and his extraordinary ability to integrate science and faith. The beatification process moved rapidly, an unmistakable sign of the authenticity of his virtues. In 1975, Pope Paul VI declared Giuseppe Moscatti blessed, officially recognizing that he had practiced Christian virtues to a heroic degree. During the ceremony in St. Peter's Square in Rome, the Pope emphasized the newly beatified's example as a shining demonstration of how medical science, practiced with technical competence and Christian charity, can become a privileged path to personal sanctification and apostolate. His canonization took place on October 25, 1987, when Pope John Paul II solemnly added Giuseppe Moscatti to the catalogue of saints. Thousands of the faithful, many of them doctors and nurses from around the world, filled St. Peter's Square, seeing in the new saint a model for their own professional practice. In his homily, the Pope pointed out that Saint Giuseppe Moscatti, physician and committed layman, found in the exercise of his profession a privileged arena for the witness of his faith. He was able to see in his patients not only bodies to heal, but whole persons, children of God, needing both medical care and spiritual comfort. The legacy of Saint Giuseppe Moscatti remains alive in today's church and society. Countless healthcare institutions, medical schools, professional health associations, and charitable organizations bear his name and draw inspiration from his example. He serves as a bridge between science and faith, proving that there is no contradiction between rigorous scientific practice and a deep Christian life. In a world where medicine runs the risk of becoming so technical that it overlooks the integral dignity of the human person, the Holy Doctor of Naples reminds us that every patient must be treated as if he or she were Christ. Beyond his impact on the medical field, Saint Giuseppe Moscatti has inspired generations of Catholic laypeople to seek holiness in everyday life. His example shows that one need not enter a convent or monastery to reach the heights of sanctity. One's professional work, lived with technical competence and supernatural love, can become a path of Christian perfection and a powerful instrument of evangelization. This aspect of his example is particularly meaningful today, when the Church is rediscovering and promoting the specific vocation of laypeople in her evangelizing mission. Chapter 12. Prayer to Saint Giuseppe Moscatti. Glorious Saint Giuseppe Moscatti, holy physician who admirably combined medical science with the Christian faith, we come to you with childlike trust to implore your powerful intercession before God's throne. You who in your earthly life were a channel of divine mercy, alleviating the suffering of countless patients through both your knowledge and your charity, continue your work of compassion from heaven for us, your brothers and sisters, still journeying through this valley of tears. We implore you, Holy Doctor of the Poor, to obtain from God health for our ailing bodies when it serves our eternal salvation. Above all, we ask you to help us receive health of the soul, delivering us from sin, the greatest of all illnesses. May we never forget, following your example, that true life is the one that blooms in eternity. Saint Giuseppe Moscatti, you who saw in every sick person the suffering face of Christ, teach us to recognize the Lord's presence in our suffering brothers and sisters, serving them with the same dedication and love you practiced. Help us understand, as you did, that science without faith is a light that does not illuminate the deepest mysteries of the human being. Model of the Christian professional, obtain for all doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers the grace to carry out their noble mission with technical expertise and a profound spirit of service. May they, like you, see in each patient not merely a body to be healed, but a whole person, a child of God who also needs spiritual care. A shining example of a holy layman, inspire all Christian faithful to seek holiness in the midst of the world, transforming their professional work and their family and social responsibilities into opportunities for evangelical witness and a path toward perfection. Saint Giuseppe Moscatti, who lived with the Eucharist at your center, the source of your tireless charity, help us discover in this sacrament the nourishment we need to sustain us in our tribulations and the strength to serve our brothers and sisters generously. Finally, Holy Doctor, in the hour of our death, assist us with your powerful intercession so that, purified by divine mercy, we may join you in the eternal contemplation of God, the supreme healer of our souls. Amen.